Before I get to my text, let me share something of my testimony. When I was converted at the University of Texas, I was immediately introduced to men like E.M. Bounds, Praying Hyde, Leonard Ravenhill, C.T. Studd, Hudson Taylor, and my dearest and longest friend, George Mueller. And from them, I learned things about prayer, and I learned to seek God. I learned about the inside of a closet, and to pray and to tarry and to wait upon my God, and to believe that I should never believe that what has been given me in the new covenant is less than what has been given in the old. That if there were workings of God in the old, surely there are workings of God and miraculous things that happen among us to whom the end of the ages has come. That we should expect great things in answer to our praying. And that if we would tarry with Him, we would see His power, His presence in our life. But as I would go out on the street and preach, I started out as a street preacher. That's why I always tell young preachers who are looking for a place to preach that there's a pulpit on absolutely every corner. But with all my praying and all my misguided zeal, there was very little power. To some degree, there was great things God did, but in my own heart, there was something missing. And so as I was directed, I went to seminary. A by no means small seminary. At the time, I believe the largest in the world. And I studied with all my might. I took the most difficult professors: Greek, Hebrew, history, systematic. But I found nothing there. There were a few good men. A few men who walked with God and loved God. But basically I found nothing there. Because they taught me all the theology that closed every church in Germany. I was taught Karl Barths, Otto Weber, Jürgen Moltmann. Higher criticism, on and on and on. And I think the only thing that kept me from becoming a liberal was the grace of God, the providence of God, and the fact that it's very difficult to be a liberal and a street preacher at the same time. I can remember going to class one day in systematic, and we were studying eschatology, and I began to weep. Not make a show, but I guess tears were running down my face as I thought about the street people that lived with me. I lived down on the street at that time with street people. And I thought about how if Christ came back at that moment, they would surely go to hell without a doubt. The professor noticed the tears coming down my cheek, and after class he walked up to me with some encouraging words. He put his arm around me and he said this: "Paul, don't take this so hard. Don't be surprised if on the day of judgment Jesus lets all the goats jump in the sheep line." But I went to Peru as a missionary, in no way qualified. We come to think today that everyone who wants to be a missionary can be a missionary. That's as absurd as saying everyone who wants to be an elder can be an elder. There are requirements. Requirements of theology, requirements of character. You simply cannot get around the demands of Scripture. But in God's providence, I was allowed to go. But there wasn't, other than a prayer life and zeal, there wasn't much to say. I learned the ways to do evangelism, get people to jump through certain evangelical hoops, and if they say yes after each question, you popishly pronounce them to be born again. But then I came into contact with an ex-Catholic priest by the name of Jesus Hurtado, who had been converted. Brilliant man. Latin, Greek, just absolutely brilliant man. And after he was converted, he decided that he would go to Germany, where the Reformation occurred, in order to learn the truths of Scripture. But when he got there, he discovered they were doing the same thing that the Catholic Church was doing. So he came back to Peru, and he started a Bible Institute, and he asked me if I would teach. I thought, well, I've been to seminary. I know Greek. I'll help you out. And this is where God truly began to change my life, young man. Because this man, Jesus Hurtado, was so sick and tired of getting everything but Scripture that the first semester that I taught was this. The students read through the entire Bible, 10 chapters a day. They write out a chapter summary. They write out a commentary of each chapter. I mean, it was phenomenal. It was hours and hours of work a day just in the Scriptures. And then they would come to class, and the only thing that class was simply ask the teacher all your questions. So I began to study Scripture about 10 hours a day. Because even though I graduated near the top of my class in seminary, I didn't know the Scriptures. And just hours and hours and hours. After making my way through the first 5 books of the Pentateuch, I discovered I was no longer a Baptist. Because I had gone to a Baptist seminary. And the things that I was learning there was nothing of what they taught me. And so I decided that I would go back to the States for a month or two. Try to figure out, what am I? This was after I finished the entire course. We'd gone through the entire Bible. I went back to the States to discover, who do I belong to? And someone handed me a book by Boyce, The Abstract of Principles. I began to read it. And I realized that I had not stopped becoming a Baptist. I realized that I had become one. But then, the door began to open with, throughout history, jewels that God had given us. There was Spurgeon, and I read him. There was Edwards, and Whitfield, and Owen, and my lovely John Flavel. And there's Rutherford, and on and on and on. Now, what did this do to me? I am glad that what I heard from them was a confirmation of what I had learned in Scripture, only I couldn't think it nor say it as good as they could. But this is the greatest thing I learned from them. As Paul tells the church in Corinth, when you compare yourself by yourself, you are not wise. When we compare ourselves to others in the circle of contemporary Christianity, we are not wise. When we compare ourselves to Scripture, there is great wisdom there, but there is also the danger, if we separate ourselves from history, that we will interpret Scripture through the eyes of our own culture. But when we take a look throughout Christian history and discover the men and women of God that He has most used, that show greatest evidences of piety and the power of God, and we begin to compare our theology and our way of life to them, it raises the bar. It raises the standard.